Hello there, and welcome to Cosmic Sleep Stories. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've wondered about the ancient ruins scattered across our planet, those impossible structures that whisper of knowledge we've supposedly never possessed. Or perhaps you've felt a strange recognition when looking at megalithic stones, as if something deep inside you remembers what you've never learned. Either way, you're exactly where you need to be. You can rest now. Tonight, you have nothing to do but let go. Let your breathing slow, steady as the patient weathering of ancient monuments. Let your body relax, sinking into comfort like consciousness drifting through deep time. Let your mind float through the possibility, the beautiful, unsettling possibility, that our civilization might not be the first, that humanity's story might be far older and far stranger than we've been taught. Over the next hour and more, we'll explore together the question that archaeology can't quite answer and history refuses to ask. What if civilizations rose and fell before ours, not once, but multiple times, each leaving only fragments, each erased so completely that only myths and megalithic stones remember? What if we're not pioneers blazing a new trail, but travelers retracing ancient footsteps? Some facts will intrigue you. Others will simply drift by like memories from dreams, leaving only soft impressions as you sink towards sleep. And that's perfectly fine. The past doesn't demand perfect recall. It just asks to be remembered, however faintly, like a song you once knew but can no longer quite place. And before we begin our journey into the deep past, if these quiet explorations of history and mystery help you unwind at the end of your day, consider subscribing to Cosmic Sleep Stories. It helps others find this peaceful corner of ancient wonder, one sleepy soul at a time. Now, close your eyes if you'd like. Breathe slowly, feeling yourself held by Earth even as your mind prepares to contemplate the possibility that this Earth has held others before us. And let's begin our gentle journey into the deep time where myths and stones agree on truths that history has forgotten. Let's start with something simple, something you can picture right now as you rest. Imagine the Great Pyramid of Giza. Most people know it was built around 2500 BC, roughly 4,500 years ago. The precision is remarkable. The base is level to within less than an inch. The stones fit together so tightly you can't slide a knife blade between them. And it's aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60th of a single degree. Now here's what makes it strange. According to conventional history, this was built by a civilization barely out of the Bronze Age. No iron tools, no pulleys, no wheels in Egypt at that time. Just copper chisels, wooden rollers, and lots of rope. And yet the precision rivals modern laser-guided construction. The mathematics encoded in its dimensions include pi and the golden ratio. The internal passages align with specific stars. This isn't primitive architecture. This is sophisticated engineering disguised as a tomb. And the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Because underneath the pyramid, in shafts and chambers, there's older construction. Megalithic granite blocks weighing 70 to 80 tons, placed with even greater precision than the pyramid above, as if the pyramid was built on top of something far more ancient. This pattern repeats globally. In Peru, beneath Incan temples, there are older walls made of blocks so perfectly fitted they've survived earthquakes that demolished everything built later. In Turkey, beneath biblical-era settlements, there are complexes like Göbekli Tepe with astronomical alignments and sophisticated symbolism, built 11,600 years ago. That's 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the pyramids. And here's what should make you pause as you drift toward sleep. The oldest construction is often the most advanced, as if civilization didn't slowly develop from simple to complex, but rather started complex and gradually forgot, like a tide that rises high then slowly recedes, leaving only the highest watermarks to prove it was ever there. Let yourself rest with that image. Waves of civilization rising and falling across deep time, each one reaching its peak, then subsiding, leaving only fragments. And perhaps, just perhaps, we're not the first wave to reach this height. We're just the most recent one, building on beaches that ancient tides once covered. As you breathe now, let each exhale carry you deeper into time, past recorded history, past the Bronze Age, past the Stone Age, into the stretches of time where only stones and myths remain to tell the story. and what they tell is strange and consistent across cultures that never should have agreed. Every ancient culture on Earth tells a story about a world that came before this one. The Greeks spoke of golden ages that preceded their own. The Hindus described cycles of yugas, vast ages of rise and fall spanning hundreds of thousands of years. The Maya believed we live in the fifth sun, meaning 4 previous worlds existed and ended. The Hopis speak of 3 previous worlds destroyed by fire, ice, and flood. These stories were dismissed for centuries as primitive mythology, symbolic tales teaching moral lessons. But there's a problem with that dismissal. The stories are too similar across cultures that never met. They describe the same catastrophes. They mention the same astronomical events. They share the same architectural knowledge in their surviving monuments. When cultures separated by entire oceans build pyramids with identical astronomical alignments, when megalithic sites on different continents use the same impossible stone-fitting techniques, when symbols carved in South America match symbols in Egypt and both align with star positions from 12,000 years ago, the comfortable explanation of coincidence begins to crack. And underneath that crack, something else appears. Not mythology, not coincidence. Memory, distorted by time, fractured by catastrophe, passed down through generations who no longer understood what they were preserving. But memory nonetheless. Memory of a world, or perhaps multiple worlds, that existed before the last great catastrophe reset everything. Let that settle gently as you drift. You don't need to believe it. You don't need to accept or reject it. Just let it be a possibility floating in your consciousness like a dream that might or might not be memory. Because sometimes the line between those two isn't as clear as we assume. The geological record tells a story that official history often ignores. About 12,800 years ago, something dramatic happened to Earth. The Ice Age that had lasted for over 100,000 years ended suddenly, not gradually. Within a few decades, possibly within a few years, global temperatures spiked. Massive ice sheets covering North America and Northern Europe melted catastrophically. The meltwater raised sea levels by 400 feet. Coastlines were drowned. River valleys flooded. Entire continental shelves disappeared beneath the waves. This wasn't a gentle transition. This was a cataclysm that reshaped the world's geography in what would have felt like an instant to anyone who survived it. And here's where it gets interesting. Evidence suggests the end of the Ice Age wasn't just warming. There were wildfires across enormous areas. Impact markers indicating possible meteor strikes or airbursts. A layer of exotic materials in the geological record called the Younger Dryas boundary, containing nanodiamonds, melted glass, and other signatures of catastrophic heating. Some researchers propose that a comet fragment struck or exploded over the ice sheets, triggering rapid melting and widespread destruction. Others point to massive volcanic eruptions or a rapid shift in Earth's magnetic field. The exact mechanism is debated. What's not debated is that something dramatic happened, changing the world in ways that would have been apocalyptic for anyone living through it. Now, imagine you're a member of an advanced civilization living 13,000 years ago. Your people have built cities on coastlines now drowned. You've developed sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, architecture. You've created a global network of trade and communication. And then, within your lifetime, the world ends. The ice melts. The seas rise. Earthquakes shatter your cities. Volcanoes darken the sky. The survivors scatter inland, climbing to high ground, carrying what knowledge they can. Most of what your civilization built is lost beneath the waves or buried under hundreds of feet of sediment. Only the highest structures, the most massive monuments, remain visible. Your descendants remember fragments. Stories about the world before the flood. Knowledge about the stars your ancestors tracked. Techniques for building with massive stones. But each generation understands less. The context is lost. The purpose is forgotten. What was once technology becomes ritual. What was once science becomes myth. And then, 10,000 years later, a new civilization arises. They find your monuments and assume they were built by primitive people with simple tools because that fits their narrative of linear progress from simple to complex. They can't conceive that you were advanced because all evidence of your advancement is underwater or buried, and the only things that survived are stones too massive to be carried away by time. Let yourself imagine that as sleep approaches. Not as literal truth necessarily, but as a thought experiment. What if the strange precision of ancient monuments isn't primitive people attempting sophistication, but sophisticated people whose full capabilities were erased by catastrophe, leaving only their strongest works? The underwater discoveries make this possibility harder to dismiss. Off the coast of Japan, there are structures called the Yonaguni formations. Terraces, steps, right angles, flat surfaces, all at depths that have been underwater for over 10,000 years. Some geologists insist they're natural formations. Others point out that natural erosion doesn't create straight lines, perfect angles, and parallel cuts. Off the coast of India near Dwarka, sonar has revealed what appears to be city structures in geometric patterns, again at depths consistent with pre-flood coastlines. Near Cuba, similar formations. Off the Mediterranean coast, near Peru, everywhere we look at the ancient coastlines now underwater, we find suggestive anomalies that look disturbingly architectural. The counterargument is always the same. We have no artifacts. We have no clear proof. And that's true in a sense. But consider what survives 12,000 years underwater. Organic materials decay completely. Metals corrode. Pottery breaks down. Clay tablets dissolve. What remains? Only stone. Only the heaviest, most durable constructions. Only megalithic architecture. And we do have that. We have it globally in patterns too similar to be coincidental. We have it built with techniques we can barely replicate today. We have it aligned to astronomical positions that require sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. We have it, but we refuse to accept what it might mean because accepting it would require rewriting too much of our comfortable narrative. As you rest now, let yourself be comfortable with uncertainty. You don't need to believe in lost civilizations to appreciate the mysteries they represent. You don't need to reject mainstream archaeology to wonder why so many ancient sites share impossible similarities. The beauty is in the question, not necessarily the answer. And the question is elegant in its simplicity. If civilizations can fall, and if catastrophes can erase most traces of what existed before, then how confident can we really be that we're the first to reach this level? Confidence is easy when you haven't looked carefully at the evidence. But once you've seen the precision of ancient stonework, the sophistication of ancient astronomy, the global distribution of identical techniques, confidence gives way to curiosity. And curiosity, as you drift toward sleep, is a gentle companion. It doesn't demand answers. It just invites you to wonder, to imagine, to consider possibilities that make the past deeper and more mysterious than you learned in school. And in that wondering, there's a kind of peace. The peace of knowing that reality is stranger than we've been told, and that strangeness is not frightening, but fascinating. Let's talk about genetics for a moment. Something interesting appears in human DNA, something that doesn't quite fit the standard narrative of human evolution. About 50,000 to 70,000 years ago, human population crashed dramatically. We went through what's called a genetic bottleneck, dropping to perhaps 10,000 to 30,000 individuals globally, nearly extinct. Some researchers propose this was caused by the eruption of Mount Toba in Indonesia, creating a volcanic winter that lasted years. Others suggest disease or other factors. But whatever the cause, humanity came very close to disappearing entirely. And when populations recovered, they spread rapidly across the world, carrying sophisticated tools, symbolic art, and complex language with them. This doesn't quite match the expected pattern of slow evolutionary development. It's more consistent with a remnant population, survivors who already possessed advanced capabilities, spreading out to repopulate a devastated world. And those capabilities appeared suddenly in the archaeological record, as if switched on rather than gradually developed. Then there are the genetic anomalies. Small populations in isolated regions carrying gene sequences that don't fit with their supposed ancestry. Basque people in Europe with a language unrelated to any other known language family. Pacific Islanders with genetic markers suggesting contact with South American populations thousands of years before the supposed first contact. Australian Aboriginals with genetic evidence of much older human presence than conventional timelines allow. These aren't mistakes. They're data points that don't fit the model. And when data doesn't fit the model, you're supposed to adjust the model, not ignore the data. But history has a way of becoming comfortable, and comfortable narratives resist change even when evidence suggests change is warranted. What if those genetic anomalies are fragments, remnants of older population distributions from before the last catastrophic reset? What if the Basque language is a lone survivor of a pre-flood language family? What if ancient maritime capabilities were more advanced than we assume, allowing contact between populations we've decided couldn't possibly have met? None of this proves lost civilizations definitively, but all of it suggests our understanding of the past is incomplete, that there are pieces missing from the puzzle, that the story we tell about human history might be the outline of something much more complex. And as you drift now, feeling sleep approaching like a gentle tide, let yourself appreciate that incompleteness. Not everything needs to be understood completely. Not every mystery needs to be solved. Sometimes the not knowing is more interesting than the knowing, the questions more valuable than the answers. Because questions keep us curious, keep us looking, keep us aware that what we know is always less than what there is to know. And in that humility, there's wisdom. The wisdom to stay open, to stay wondering, to stay connected to the great mystery of being conscious creatures on a planet with a past far deeper than our own memories can reach. The myths themselves contain surprising precision for stories supposedly invented by primitive people. The Dogon people of Mali, studied in the 1930s and 40s, possessed detailed knowledge of the star Sirius, including the fact that it's a binary system with a companion star invisible to the naked eye. Sirius B wasn't discovered by Western astronomy until 1862 and wasn't photographed until 1970. Yet the Dogon described it accurately, including its 50-year orbital period. When asked how they knew this, they pointed to their traditions, which said the knowledge came from visitors from Sirius in ancient times. Western academics dismiss this as either contamination from modern astronomy somehow entering their oral tradition or pure coincidence. But that requires assuming the Dogon either lied about their traditions or absorbed complex astronomy without anyone noticing. The Piri-Reis map, created in 1513, shows the coastline of Antarctica with remarkable accuracy, depicting the land beneath the ice. Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820 and wasn't mapped beneath the ice until the 1950s using seismic technology. Piri-Reis noted on the map that he compiled it from over 20 older source maps, some dating to the time of Alexander the Great. How did ancient cartographers map Antarctica's coast without the ice? The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a Roman-era shipwreck, is a sophisticated bronze device containing dozens of gears, calculating astronomical positions and predicting eclipses. It dates to about 200 BC. Nothing comparable appears in European history for another 1,500 years. It's not supposed to exist at that level of complexity in that era. Yet it does, suggesting ancient Greek technology was far more advanced than we typically assume. These aren't myths. These are physical objects, documented maps, recorded traditions that contain information they shouldn't contain according to our timeline of human capability. Each one requires either dismissal through increasingly strained explanations or acknowledgement that ancient humans were more capable, more knowledgeable, more technologically sophisticated than our standard model allows. And if they were more sophisticated, if they possessed knowledge we've attributed to later eras, then what else might they have achieved that's been lost? What other capabilities might have existed before the catastrophes that reset civilization? What other knowledge might be encoded in myths we've dismissed as fantasy? Let those questions rest lightly as sleep deepens. You don't need to solve them. You don't need to advocate for any particular answer. You just need to let them be present, like stars visible at the edge of vision. They're whether you focus on them or not, part of the landscape of mysteries that make existence interesting. Some researchers propose that if previous civilizations existed, they would have left clear evidence in the geological record. Industrial materials, radioactive signatures, widespread pollution markers, and finding none of these, they conclude no advanced civilization existed before ours. But this assumes previous civilizations would be identical to ours, would rely on the same technologies, would leave the same footprints. What if ancient advancement took different forms? What if their technology worked with natural forces rather than against them, using acoustic properties, electromagnetic fields, water power, principles we're only now rediscovering? What if their industry was biological rather than mechanical, shaping living systems rather than extracting dead materials? we're finding evidence that ancient people understood acoustics in ways we're only now appreciating. The Great Pyramid's chambers resonate at frequencies that affect human consciousness. Megalithic sites in Malta and elsewhere show acoustic tuning, suggesting ritual use of sound. Stone circles amplify and focus acoustic energy in ways that require sophisticated understanding of wave mechanics. Ancient people understood magnetism. Lodestones were used for navigation. Sacred sites cluster at geomagnetic anomalies. Alignments follow magnetic rather than geographic north. Modern research shows these sites often sit on underground water flows, fault lines, or geological features that create measurable electromagnetic effects. These aren't primitive superstitions. These are practical applications of natural phenomena. And if ancient people understood these principles, what else might they have understood? What other natural forces might they have worked with? And if their technology was based on principles we've largely forgotten in favor of petroleum and electricity, would we even recognize it as technology? The Antikythera mechanism only survived because bronze doesn't decay easily. If it had been made of organic materials, or if its principles had been applied to living systems rather than mechanical ones, nothing would remain but myths about ancient people who could predict the stars. And we would dismiss those myths as obviously impossible because we assume technology must look like our technology to count as technology. As you sink deeper now, let go of the need for certainty. Let go of the requirement that the past must conform to your expectations. Let yourself drift in the space between knowing and not knowing, where possibilities exist without demanding belief, where mysteries remain mysterious without causing anxiety, where the strangeness of our planet's past can be appreciated without needing to be resolved. The megalithic sites themselves are remarkable enough to warrant wonder. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built 11,600 years ago, features massive stone pillars weighing up to 20 tons, carved with sophisticated imagery of animals, humans, and abstract symbols. The construction requires quarrying, transporting, erecting, and carving stones using tools that supposedly didn't exist in that era. And when construction finished, the entire site was deliberately buried, preserved under tons of earth. Why would hunter-gatherers, supposedly living at subsistence level, invest the enormous effort to build something so sophisticated, then bury it? Why would they possess the organizational capability to coordinate such massive construction? Why would they have the astronomical knowledge encoded in its alignments? Every answer requires assuming capabilities we don't believe hunter-gatherers possessed. Or we could assume they weren't hunter-gatherers in the sense we imagine. Perhaps they were survivors of an earlier civilization, preserving knowledge by encoding it in stone before burying it for future rediscovery. Perhaps they were the remnant, building monuments to remember what had been lost, knowing their descendants would forget. Pumapunku in Bolivia features stones cut with such precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate them. Internal angles are exact. Flat surfaces are perfectly smooth. Complex, interlocking shapes fit together with millimeter tolerance. Conventional tools of the era, copper and stone, shouldn't be capable of this level of precision on extremely hard stone. Yet the precision exists. The conventional response is that they must have had techniques we've lost, or that they spent enormous amounts of time achieving precision through patient grinding. But this explanation feels incomplete when you actually look at the stones, when you run your hand over surfaces that feel machine-cut, when you see angles that look routed rather than ground. Baalbek in Lebanon has foundation stones weighing over 800 tons. The largest is estimated at 1,000 tons or more. Modern cranes can lift perhaps 20,000 tons using advanced engineering, but those cranes are enormous structures themselves. Ancient people supposedly moved these stones using nothing but ropes and wooden rollers. The physics doesn't quite work, even with thousands of workers. Yet the stones are there, precisely placed, carefully fitted, and underneath them, even older construction suggests this was a sacred site for far longer than recorded history acknowledges. As if ancient people kept rebuilding on the same spot because something about that location mattered, some property or alignment or significance that predated even the earliest structures we can date. Let yourself appreciate the scale of these monuments as you rest, not with frustration at not understanding them, but with wonder that they exist at all. Someone built these. Someone moved those stones. Someone achieved that precision. And whether they were who we think they were or someone else entirely, the achievement stands. The mystery endures. And the stones remain, silent witnesses to capabilities we haven't adequately explained. Now, as sleep truly deepens, as thoughts become less structured and more dreamlike, let's consider what it would mean if civilizations really do rise and fall in cycles. Not as some supernatural prophecy, but as a natural consequence of how planets work. Earth's climate isn't stable. Ice ages come and go. Magnetic poles flip. Asteroid impacts occur. Volcanic supereruptions reshape entire regions. These aren't theoretical. They've happened repeatedly throughout Earth's history, and they're dramatic enough to end civilizations completely. A supervolcano eruption could blanket continents in ash, block out the sun for years, cause global crop failures. An asteroid impact could trigger tsunamis, earthquakes, and climate disruption. A rapid magnetic pole reversal could strip away atmospheric protection, increase radiation, disrupt navigation. Any of these events would be catastrophic for modern civilization. Our interconnected systems, our dependence on global trade, our concentrated populations would all become vulnerabilities. A serious enough disruption could cascade into collapse. And if it happened, what would survive 10,000 years later? Probably not much. Maybe some megalithic structures. Maybe some myths. Maybe genetic traces of survivors who migrated to safer areas. This isn't doom-mongering. This is just recognizing that planets are dynamic systems, that stability is temporary, that the conditions allowing civilizations to flourish are more fragile than they appear. And if civilizations are fragile, then multiple cycles of rise and fall become not a mystical idea, but a reasonable expectation over hundreds of thousands of years. We like to imagine we're special, that we're the first to reach this level, that our technology represents an unprecedented achievement. But perhaps we're not as special as we think. Perhaps we're just the latest iteration of a pattern that's played out before. And perhaps some of those previous iterations left traces that we're only now beginning to recognize for what they might be. This doesn't diminish our achievements. It doesn't make us less remarkable. If anything, it makes us part of something larger, part of a deeper human story that encompasses not just the last few thousand years, but potentially dozens or hundreds of thousands of years. It connects us to ancestors we've never properly honored because we didn't know they existed at the level they might have existed. And in that connection, there's a kind of peace. The peace of being part of a continuity much longer than individual lives or single civilizations. The peace of knowing that even if everything we build eventually falls, that's not failure. That's just the nature of being a civilization on a dynamic planet. The peace of accepting that mystery and uncertainty are permanent features of existence, not temporary problems waiting to be solved. Let that peace support you as consciousness fades completely. Let the questions we've explored drift into dreams or into dreamless sleep. Let the mysteries of ancient stones and drowned coastlines and forgotten knowledge become background, present but not demanding, there but not insistent, part of the rich tapestry of existence, but not requiring constant attention. You've contemplated the possibility tonight that we might be the 7th civilization, or maybe the 8th, or maybe the 20th. The exact number doesn't matter. What matters is opening to the idea that human history is deeper and stranger than the textbooks suggest, that our ancestors were more capable than we've given them credit for, that the world has held wonders we've barely begun to rediscover. Whether you believe in lost civilizations or remain skeptical, the exercise of considering the possibility has value. It makes you look at ancient monuments with fresh eyes. It makes you question comfortable assumptions. It makes history more mysterious and more interesting. And in that increased interest, there's engagement with the past that honors it regardless of what exactly that past contained. The stones are still there, waiting to be understood. The myths are still being told, carrying fragments of memories across generations. The coastlines are still drowned, hiding whatever they hide beneath centuries of sediment. The mysteries remain, and perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be solved completely, but rather to be appreciated for the questions they pose, the wonder they inspire, the humility they encourage. So as you drift into complete sleep now, let yourself be grateful for the mysteries. Grateful for the ancient builders, whoever they were. Grateful for the stones that survived when everything else didn't. Grateful for the myths that preserved fragments of truths we've barely begun to decode. Grateful for living in a time when we can ask these questions, can explore these possibilities, can wonder about our place in a human story that might stretch back far further than we've dared to imagine. And let that gratitude, that wonder, that openness to mystery carry you into sleep. Not anxious sleep troubled by questions without answers, but peaceful sleep enriched by questions that make existence more fascinating. Sleep that honors both what we know and what we don't know. Sleep that rests in uncertainty without needing certainty. Sleep that dreams of ancient worlds and wonders whether our world is ancient too, just waiting for some future civilization to rediscover it and wonder about us the way we wonder about them. The cycle continues. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge is gained and lost. Stones are placed and forgotten and rediscovered. And through it all, consciousness persists, experiencing each moment, each era, each iteration of human presence on this strange and beautiful planet. You are part of that continuity. Your life, however brief in geological terms, is a thread in a tapestry woven across vast spans of time. You carry forward something that was carried forward to you, and you'll pass it forward to whatever comes next. And in being part of that, in participating however modestly in the ongoing human story, you're connected to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. Let that connection hold you as you sleep. Let it be a source of comfort rather than responsibility. You don't need to solve the mysteries or prove the theories or convince anyone of anything. You just need to be here, now, breathing, resting, existing as a conscious being on a planet with a past far deeper than your own memory and a future far longer than your own lifetime. And that's enough. That's always been enough. The mystery doesn't need solving tonight. The questions don't need answering right now. You don't need to figure out if we're the seventh civilization or the first. All you need to do is sleep, deeply and peacefully, knowing that tomorrow the stones will still be there. The myths will still whisper their fragmentary truths, and the mystery will still invite wonder from anyone willing to look carefully and imagine freely. But before sleep takes you completely, let's explore deeper into the mystery. Let's look at what lies beneath the waves, what's encoded in our very cells, what the ancient world tried so desperately to preserve. Because the story of lost civilizations isn't just about stones and myths. It's about patterns that repeat, knowledge that resurfaces, and warnings that echo across millennia. The underwater discoveries are perhaps the most tantalizing pieces of evidence for pre-flood civilizations. When you map the ancient coastlines as they existed 12,000 years ago during the last glacial maximum, before the ice melted and the seas rose, you're looking at a completely different world. What are now shallow continental shelves were vast fertile plains? What are now islands were mountaintops in continuous landmasses? Sundaland, for instance, was an enormous territory connecting Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and beyond into a single landmass roughly the size of India. The climate was perfect. The soil was rich. Rivers flowed through broad valleys now submerged beneath hundreds of feet of ocean. If you were going to build a civilization anywhere 15,000 years ago, Sundaland would have been an ideal location. And when we scan the seafloor where Sundaland used to be, we find anomalies. Straight lines that look like ancient roads. Geometric patterns that resemble city layouts. Formations that appear too regular to be natural erosion. The problem is that proper underwater archaeology is expensive and difficult, so most of these sites remain unexplored, existing only as sonar signatures and satellite imagery anomalies. But the patterns are consistent globally. Off the coast of India near the submerged city of Dwarka, divers have found structures, pottery, and artifacts at depths suggesting continuous habitation from 7,500 years ago back to possibly 12,000 years ago as the coastline gradually receded. The Indian government has conducted limited surveys revealing organized streets, evidence of a planned city now beneath the sea. Near the Bahamas, Bimini Road consists of limestone blocks arranged in patterns that look remarkably like a constructed pathway. Skeptics argue it's natural beach rock formation. Proponents point out that the blocks are uniform in size, arranged in clear linear patterns, and extend for considerable distances in remarkably straight lines. Natural formation can create straight edges, But multiple parallel straight lines arranged at regular intervals is harder to explain naturally. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument features massive stone formations with flat surfaces, right angles, and what appear to be carved steps, channels, and terraces. The site has been underwater for at least 10,000 years based on sea level data. Marine geologist Masaaki Kimura has studied it extensively and maintains it shows clear evidence of human modification. Mainstream archaeology remains skeptical, but the geometric precision is difficult to dismiss as entirely natural. Let yourself visualize these drowned landscapes as you rest. Imagine cities on coastlines now silent beneath hundreds of feet of water. Imagine harbors where ships once docked, now inhabited only by fish. Imagine monuments raised to forgotten gods, now covered in coral and silt. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and most of what sank beneath the waves will never be recovered. And that's the point, really. If a civilization existed before the flood, and if that civilization built primarily on coastlines where resources and trade were abundant, then 90% or more of their construction would now be underwater. Only their highest achievements, their mountaintop temples, their inland monuments, would remain visible, and those monuments would seem disconnected, mysterious, impossible to attribute to any known culture because the culture that built them is drowned. This explains so much about the strangeness of ancient sites. They're not the full picture. They're the fragments that survived in the worst locations for preservation, the mountain peaks and desert plateaus, while the best evidence rests on continental shelves beneath the sea, largely unexplored and likely to remain so. Now let's talk about something even more fascinating, the possibility that ancient knowledge was preserved not just in stone, but in something far more durable and far more intimate. Your DNA. The human genome contains mysteries that geneticists are only beginning to unravel. Most of your DNA, about 98%, doesn't code for proteins and was once dismissed as junk DNA. But we now know it's anything but junk. Large sections of non-coding DNA appear to regulate gene expression, control development, and contain information we don't yet understand. Some sequences are highly conserved across millions of years of evolution, suggesting they serve crucial functions even though we can't identify what those functions are. And some sequences show patterns that look almost intentional, mathematical ratios, repeating structures, organizational schemes that feel designed rather than random. Now, this doesn't prove anything about ancient civilizations, but it does open an interesting possibility. If you wanted to preserve information across cataclysms that destroy everything else, where would you put it? Stone can be buried or eroded. Metal corrodes. Writing degrades. But DNA persists. DNA gets passed from parent to child automatically. DNA can carry information for hundreds of thousands of years with relatively minor changes. If an advanced civilization knew a catastrophe was coming, if they understood genetics well enough, could they have encoded information into the human genome? Could they have created markers, switches, sequences that would activate under specific conditions? It sounds like science fiction, and maybe it is. But geneticists have found that certain gene sequences do activate in response to environmental stressors, like low oxygen, extreme cold, or high radiation. Some populations carry genes that provide advantages in harsh environments, advantages that seem almost too perfect, too specific. Tibetans have genes that allow them to thrive at high altitudes where others would struggle. Bajau Sea nomads have genes that enhance their ability to hold their breath and dive to extreme depths. Inuit populations have genetic adaptations to extremely cold climates and high-fat diets. These adaptations supposedly developed over thousands of years of natural selection. But what if some of these adaptations were inherited from earlier populations who survived previous catastrophes? What if the genes that help you survive at high altitude were selected for during an ice age, when sea levels were lower and habitable zones were higher? What if diving adaptations come from populations who lived on Sundaland and needed to harvest ocean resources extensively? There's a particular genetic marker called haplogroup X that appears in some Native American populations, in some European populations, and in some Middle Eastern populations, but it's absent from Northeast Asia where Native Americans supposedly migrated from. The distribution doesn't fit the standard migration models. It's as if there was an ancient population that existed before the currently accepted migrations, a population whose descendants are now scattered in ways that don't match our timeline. As you drift deeper into sleep, let yourself contemplate this idea. What if you're carrying fragments of ancient memory in your very cells? What if instincts that feel inexplicable, moments of déjà vu around ancient sites, unexplained abilities that run in certain families? What if these are echoes of capabilities that were once widespread, now reduced to rare genetic variants? You don't need to believe it literally. Just let it be a beautiful possibility. The idea that you're connected to the deep past, not just culturally or intellectually, but biologically. That your ancestors weren't just scattered tribes learning to survive, but potentially remnants of something greater, carrying forward whatever they could preserve through the bottleneck of catastrophe. The astronomical alignments of ancient sites present another layer of mystery. Many megalithic structures align with precision to celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, specific star rises, lunar cycles. Stonehenge is the famous example, aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. But Stonehenge is far from unique. Thousands of stone circles, temple complexes, and megalithic sites worldwide show similar astronomical orientations. What's particularly interesting is that some alignments point to sky positions that are no longer accurate. Due to Earth's axial precession, a slow wobble in the planet's rotation, the positions of stars relative to the horizon change over a cycle of roughly 26,000 years. Stars that rose at the spring equinox 10,000 years ago are different from the stars that rise at the spring equinox today. The Great Sphinx of Giza, according to some researchers, aligns perfectly with the constellation Leo as it appeared on the horizon at the spring equinox around 10,500 BC. The three pyramids of Giza align with the three stars of Orion's belt as they appeared not in 2500 BC when the pyramids were supposedly built, but as they appeared in 10,500 BC. The Angkor Wat temple complex in Cambodia mirrors the constellation Draco, as it appeared in 10,500 BC. Orthodox archaeology dismisses these alignments as coincidental or argues that the dating methods are flawed. But when multiple sites on different continents all align to the same date, around 10,500 BC, coincidence becomes harder to accept. It's as if whoever built these sites, or at least designed their astronomical alignments, was memorializing a specific date, a date far older than conventional history allows for sophisticated construction. What was special about 10,500 BC? That's roughly 12,500 years ago, just before the rapid end of the last ice age, just before the cataclysmic melting and flooding, just before the Younger Dryas impact, or whatever catastrophe reset the world. If civilizations existed then, and if they knew catastrophe was approaching, might they have built monuments pointing to that moment in time as a way of saying, "We were here, this is when we existed, remember us?" Let that idea settle gently as sleep deepens. Ancient builders encoding dates into monuments not for their own time, but for future civilizations, for us, leaving messages that we're only now beginning to decode. Messages that say the world is older than you think, that human capability is deeper than you've been taught, that you're not the first to stand where you're standing. The construction techniques themselves demand explanation. Moving 800-ton stones at Baalbek, cutting diorite and granite with copper tools at Pumapunku, achieving tolerances of fractions of millimeters in massive megalithic architecture. Conventional explanations involve lots of workers, lots of time, patient grinding, and polishing. But when you actually try to replicate these techniques with the tools supposedly available, you discover they don't quite work. Modern experiments trying to cut hard stone with copper chisels show that copper wears down faster than the stone does. You'd need to constantly reshape your tools, and the time required to achieve the observed precision would be prohibitive. Some researchers propose they used harder stones to grind the softer ones, but many of the precisely worked stones are among the hardest: basalt, granite, diorite. Grinding these by hand to achieve flat surfaces accurate to fractions of millimeters is theoretically possible, but practically questionable. Then there's the question of how they move the stones. The largest blocks at Baalbek weigh over 1,000 tons. The largest confirmed lift by modern cranes is around 20,000 tons, but those cranes are massive structures requiring extensive preparation and support. Ancient people supposedly moved 1,000-ton stones using wooden rollers and rope. The math doesn't work cleanly. Wooden rollers would crush. Rope would snap. Even with thousands of workers, the coordination required seems implausible with the technology supposedly available. Some alternative researchers propose they use sound, that certain frequencies can reduce the effective weight of stone by causing resonance. There are stories in various traditions about stones being moved through sound, through chanting or instruments. Modern physics confirms that acoustic levitation is possible at small scales. Whether it's scalable to multi-ton blocks is unknown, but it's at least conceptually possible in ways that wooden rollers aren't. Others propose they used water, that by flooding channels and using buoyancy, they could move stones more easily than by dragging them over land. There's evidence of ancient canal systems near some megalithic sites. Water could explain how stones were transported, but not how they were lifted and placed with such precision. The point isn't to solve the mystery definitively. The point is that the mystery exists, that conventional explanations feel incomplete, that something about ancient construction suggests capabilities we haven't properly accounted for. And if ancient builders had techniques we've lost, what else might they have known? What other capabilities might be hidden in the fragments that survived? As you rest now, appreciate the humility that mystery requires. To say I don't know how they did this is more honest than inventing explanations that don't quite fit. To admit that ancient people might have been more capable than we assume is more respectful than dismissing their achievements as primitive attempts at sophistication. The stones are there. The precision is measurable. The alignments are documented. Whatever explanation eventually proves correct, it will need to account for capabilities that conventional history currently underestimates. Let's talk about the myths themselves, not as vague stories, but as potential historical records. The flood myths are the most widespread, appearing in virtually every ancient culture with remarkable consistency. The biblical flood with Noah's Ark, the Sumerian flood with Utnapishtim, the Greek flood with Deucalion, the Hindu flood with Manu, the Chinese flood with Gunyu, Native American flood stories, Australian Aboriginal flood stories, African flood stories, South American flood stories. These stories share common elements. A great flood destroying the world. A chosen few survivors who preserve animals, plants, and knowledge. Instructions received through dreams or divine communication. The flood lasting for specific durations, often 40 days or similar. The survivors repopulating the earth. Rainbows or other signs marking the end of the catastrophe. For a long time, these were assumed to be either independent memories of local flooding events, exaggerated over time, or borrowings from each other as cultures shared stories. But the problem is that many of these cultures were geographically isolated when the stories originated. Australian Aboriginals didn't interact with Sumerians. South Americans didn't interact with Hindus. Yet the stories are remarkably similar. The alternative explanation is that they're all remembering the same event, a global or near-global catastrophe involving rapid sea level rise from melting ice sheets. The flood did happen around 11,600 years ago, when massive ice dams broke, releasing enormous volumes of water, when ice sheets collapsed, raising sea levels by hundreds of feet, when coastlines were inundated and coastal populations were forced to flee inland. If civilizations existed on those coastlines, they would have been devastated. Survivors would have carried the memory forward. Over thousands of years, the memory would become mythologized, simplified, merged with local details. But the core event, the catastrophic flood, would remain consistent because it actually happened, and because it was traumatic enough to be remembered. The same pattern appears with other catastrophe myths. Stories of fire from the sky appear globally. The Greek story of Phaeton driving the sun chariot disastrously. Hindu stories of celestial weapons destroying cities. Native American stories of sky beings bringing destruction. These could be memories of meteor impacts, of asteroids breaking up in the atmosphere and raining down fire, of impact winters following major strikes. Stories of extended darkness appear in many traditions. The Fimbulwinter of Norse mythology, 3 winters with no summer in between. Chinese stories of a time when the sun didn't rise. South American stories of a great darkness. These could be memories of volcanic winters, of massive eruptions throwing enough ash into the atmosphere to block sunlight for years, causing global cooling and crop failures. If you approach myths not as primitive fantasies, but as distorted historical records, patterns emerge. Catastrophic events cluster around the same time period, 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Descriptions of advanced capabilities appear in many stories: flying machines in Hindu epics, great weapons in Greek myths, sophisticated knowledge in Sumerian tales. Stories of giants or hero ancestors who possessed great knowledge and power, who taught the later humans agriculture, architecture, astronomy. These giants, or gods, or ancestors could be mythologized memories of survivors from an earlier civilization. People who seemed godlike to later populations because they retained knowledge that had been lost, who could build what others couldn't, who understood the stars and seasons in ways that seemed magical but were actually scientific. Let yourself drift with these stories as sleep deepens, not analyzing them critically, but feeling them as potential echoes of real events, real people, real knowledge preserved through the only medium that survives when everything else is destroyed. Human memory passed through countless generations, distorted by time, but retaining fragments of truth. The cyclical view of history appears in many ancient philosophies. The Hindu concept of yugas describes vast cycles of time, ages lasting hundreds of thousands of years, where civilization rises and falls in repeating patterns. The Krita Yuga is a golden age of wisdom and long life. The Treta Yuga sees decline in virtue and capability. The Dvapara Yuga sees further decline. The Kali Yuga, the current age, is the age of darkness and ignorance. According to these cycles, we're in the Kali Yuga now, the lowest point. But eventually, the cycle will complete and a new Krita Yuga will begin. Civilization will rise again to heights we can barely imagine from our current reduced state. This isn't meant as literal chronology, but as a framework for understanding that civilizations don't progress linearly. They rise and fall. Knowledge is gained and lost. What we call progress might just be recovery, remembering what was once known. The Mayan calendar is another cyclical system, tracking multiple concurrent cycles of different lengths. The famous 2012 date marked the end of a long count cycle, not the end of the world but the completion of one age and the beginning of another. The Maya believed we're in the fifth creation, meaning 4 previous worlds existed and ended. Each previous world was destroyed by different catastrophes: jaguars, wind, fire, flood. We live in the world that will eventually be destroyed by earthquakes. The Greek ages, gold, silver, bronze, iron, describe a similar pattern of decline. The Golden Age was a time of peace and abundance when humans lived like gods. Each successive age saw degradation in both moral character and material conditions. We're in the Iron Age now, an age of toil and strife. But the cycle implies eventual return to a Golden Age. These aren't just pessimistic worldviews. They're sophisticated understandings that complex systems don't remain stable indefinitely. Civilizations peak then decline. Knowledge accumulates then scatters. Institutions strengthen then corrupt. The recognition of cycles is actually quite modern in scientific terms. We now understand climate cycles, extinction cycles, geological cycles. Ancient people intuited what we're only now confirming: that stability is temporary and change is inevitable. If civilizations do rise and fall in cycles, then we're not at the pinnacle of human achievement. We're somewhere in the middle of a repeating pattern. We've recovered some of what was lost. We've developed new capabilities. But we've also forgotten things that earlier iterations knew. And eventually, our iteration will end too, whether by catastrophe or slow decline, and future civilizations will look at our ruins and wonder how we did what we did. That's not depressing. That's just honest. And there's something freeing about accepting it. It relieves the pressure to be the ultimate civilization, the final form of human development. We're just one chapter in a very long book. We do our best. We learn what we can. We build what we can, and we pass it forward. Someday, others will continue where we left off. As you drift closer to complete sleep, let that perspective settle in. You're part of something much larger than your individual life or even your civilization's lifespan. You're part of a pattern that's played out potentially many times, part of a human story that might stretch back far further than recorded history, part of a continuity that connects you to ancestors you'll never know and descendants you'll never meet. And in being part of that continuity, you fulfill your role simply by existing, by learning, by creating, by passing forward whatever knowledge and capability you can. You don't need to save the world or solve all mysteries or prove all theories. You just need to participate honestly in your moment of the cycle, doing what you can with what you have, knowing that's always been enough and always will be enough. The question of why ancient knowledge was lost is important. If previous civilizations were advanced, why didn't they prevent their own collapse? Why didn't they preserve their knowledge more effectively? Why are we rediscovering rather than continuing what they knew? These are valid questions with several possible answers. First, knowledge is fragile. It requires continuous transmission to survive. If a catastrophe kills 90% of the population, especially if it kills the educated specialists who hold most of the technical knowledge, then vast amounts of information can be lost in a single generation. The survivors might know that flying machines existed, but not how to build them. They might know that astronomy was important, but not the detailed calculations. They retain fragments, which become myths, but the practical knowledge disappears. Second, specialization makes civilizations vulnerable. In modern society, very few people understand how the complex technologies we rely on actually work. If catastrophe struck and you were among the survivors, could you rebuild? Could you generate electricity, refine metals, manufacture medicine, grow food efficiently? Most of us couldn't. We'd retain memories of what existed, but lack the practical knowledge to recreate it. Third, infrastructure collapse cascades. Ancient civilizations might have relied on networks of knowledge, libraries, schools, specialist communities. Destroy the libraries, and you lose written records. Disrupt the schools, and you lose transmission. Kill the specialists, and you lose practical expertise. Without the infrastructure to preserve and transmit knowledge, it vanishes within a few generations. Fourth, priorities change in survival mode. If your civilization just experienced a cataclysm and you're struggling to find food and shelter, preserving advanced astronomical knowledge becomes less important than immediate survival. You teach your children how to hunt, how to farm, how to build basic shelter. The sophisticated sciences can wait until basic security is reestablished. But by the time security is reestablished generations later, the knowledge has been lost and you're starting from a much more primitive baseline. Fifth, some knowledge might have been deliberately suppressed or lost. If a civilization developed technologies that contributed to their own destruction, survivors might choose not to pass that knowledge forward. If certain capabilities led to catastrophic warfare or environmental damage, later generations might intentionally forget them as a protective measure. These factors combined mean that even a highly advanced civilization can collapse into primitive conditions within a few generations if the right catastrophe strikes. The collapse isn't gradual. It's precipitous, and recovery takes far longer than collapse. You can lose 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge in a decade, but it might take 10,000 years to relearn it. So if previous civilizations existed and fell, we shouldn't expect to find their knowledge intact. We should expect to find exactly what we do find: fragments, anomalies, techniques that don't quite fit the timeline, myths that remember capabilities but not the science behind them, monuments that showcase abilities we can barely replicate but don't explain how they were achieved. The absence of complete knowledge isn't evidence against lost civilizations. It's exactly what we'd expect to find if lost civilizations existed and fell catastrophically. The mystery isn't why we don't know everything about them. The mystery is how we know anything at all, how anything survived to hint at their existence. And yet hints did survive, encoded in stone too massive to be moved by later cultures, encoded in myths too consistent to be independent inventions, encoded possibly in our genetics as markers waiting to be understood. The ancient world didn't leave us a complete record. They left us clues. And whether we decipher those clues or not, they remain silent witnesses to the possibility that we're not the first to wonder about our place in the cosmos. As sleep takes you fully now, let all these ideas blend together into a dreamlike understanding. Not rigid belief, but fluid possibility. Not certainty, but curiosity. Not answers, but questions that make the world more interesting. Let the image of ancient coastlines now drowned, of monuments aligned to forgotten stars, of knowledge encoded in myths and stones and possibly genes, let all of it become background to peaceful sleep. You've contemplated tonight whether we might be the seventh civilization, or perhaps the eighth. or maybe the 20th. You've considered that human history might be far deeper than textbooks suggest. You've wondered if ancient people were more capable than we've acknowledged. And in that wondering, you've done something important. You've stayed curious. You've remained open. You've refused to let comfortable narratives close off mystery. That openness serves you whether or not lost civilizations actually existed. It keeps you engaged with the past, respectful of ancient achievements, humble about your own knowledge. It connects you to the long human story, to all the people who came before wondering the same questions, building the same monuments, trying to leave something that would outlast their own brief lives. And now you can rest completely, knowing that tomorrow the mysteries will still be there, waiting for anyone curious enough to look. The stones will still stand. The myths will still whisper. The drowned coastlines will still hide their secrets. And you'll still be part of the ongoing human story, one consciousness among billions, one moment in a pattern that stretches back further than we know and forward further than we can imagine. Let that be enough. Let mystery be comfortable. Let not knowing be acceptable. Let sleep come naturally and completely, untroubled by questions you can't answer, enriched by possibilities you can imagine, at peace with being a small part of something vast and strange and beautiful. The cycle continues whether you understand it or not. The earth breathes in rhythms longer than human lifetimes. Knowledge emerges and recedes like tides. Civilizations rise and fall like waves. And through it all, consciousness experiences, learns, creates, and passes forward what it can. You are that consciousness right now. This moment of wondering about lost civilizations. This moment of drifting towards sleep while contemplating deep time. This moment is your participation in the pattern. And it's perfect exactly as it is. But there's one more layer to explore before sleep claims you completely. One more thread connecting ancient past to present moment. Because something curious is happening in our current era, something that might be more than coincidence. People around the world are reporting experiences that suggest the ancient knowledge isn't entirely lost. It's waking up. Call it intuition, synchronicity, genetic memory, or collective unconscious. Doesn't matter what name you give it. The phenomenon is real. People who've never studied ancient architecture find themselves drawing designs identical to megalithic patterns. Children with no exposure to ancient myths dream symbols that match carvings found in recently excavated sites. Researchers describe moments of inexplicable knowing, sudden insights that solve problems they've been struggling with for years, insights that feel remembered rather than discovered. Some scientists dismiss this as pattern recognition, the brain finding connections in random noise. Others suggest we're more connected to each other and to our ancestors than materialist science acknowledges. Perhaps information persists in ways we don't understand yet, through fields or frequencies or mechanisms we haven't properly investigated because they don't fit our current models. The ancient world seemed to understand something about consciousness that we're only beginning to reconsider. They built temples as instruments for altered states. They used specific acoustic frequencies to induce experiences. They aligned structures to astronomical events not just to track time, but to create experiences of connection to cosmos. They treated consciousness as something that could be cultivated, expanded, trained to access information beyond immediate sensory input. We've largely lost that understanding in favor of pure materialism, the idea that consciousness is just brain activity with no deeper significance. But what if the ancients were right? What if consciousness is more fundamental than we assume? What if it's not just produced by brains, but is something brains tap into, a field or fabric underlying reality? If consciousness is fundamental, and if it can access information beyond local boundaries, then the ancient knowledge isn't really lost. It's available to anyone who learns to access it. The myths aren't just stories. They're instructions. The monuments aren't just architecture. They're technologies designed to facilitate certain states of awareness. This sounds mystical, and maybe it is. But mystical doesn't mean false. It means beyond current scientific explanation. Plenty of phenomena were mystical until we developed frameworks to understand them. Consciousness itself is still mystical in that sense. We experience it directly, but can't fully explain it materially. As you rest now on the edge of sleep, you're in a state where consciousness operates differently. The boundaries between waking and dreaming blur. The rational mind quiets. And in that quiet space, other ways of knowing can emerge. Insights, intuitions, recognitions that don't come from logical analysis, but from somewhere deeper. Ancient people cultivated these states deliberately. They used meditation, ritual, plant medicines, sensory deprivation, rhythmic sound, whatever worked to shift consciousness into modes where different information became accessible. They didn't see this as escape from reality, but as access to deeper layers of reality normally obscured by everyday awareness. Modern science is beginning to cautiously explore these territories again. Studies on meditation show measurable brain changes and health benefits. Research on psychedelics demonstrates therapeutic potential and insights about consciousness. Investigation of near-death experiences reveals consistent patterns suggesting consciousness might not be entirely brain-based. The edges of science are reaching toward ideas the ancient world took for granted. So when you wonder about lost civilizations, you're not just thinking about history. You're touching something alive, something that persists not just in stones and myths, but in the depths of awareness itself. The ancient world isn't completely dead. It echoes in moments of recognition, in dreams that feel like memories, in abilities that emerge without training, in knowledge that feels remembered rather than learned. You might have experienced this yourself. A place that feels familiar though you've never been there. A skill that comes naturally though you've never practiced it. A piece of knowledge you somehow possess without knowing how you learned it. These aren't glitches. They're glimpses of something deeper, connections to information sources beyond individual memory. And if that's true, if consciousness really does access information beyond the local and immediate, then you're connected to the ancient world more directly than through books or archaeology. You're connected through the same awareness that animated ancient builders, the same consciousness that wondered at stars and built monuments and encoded warnings for future generations. They knew you would exist. They couldn't know you specifically, but they knew future humans would wonder about them. And they left traces not just in physical materials, but in patterns of consciousness, in ways of thinking and knowing that persist across catastrophes because consciousness itself persists. This means the mystery of lost civilizations isn't just an academic question. It's personal. You're part of it. Your curiosity about ancient mysteries isn't separate from those mysteries. It's connected to them. The wondering itself is a form of remembering. The curiosity itself is a form of transmission. The ancient world is reaching you not despite the time and catastrophes separating you, but through channels that transcend those barriers. Let that possibility infuse your sleep, not as something to believe or disbelieve, but as something to feel. A connection across deep time. An awareness that you're part of a continuity much older than civilization, much deeper than recorded history. A recognition that when you look at ancient monuments and feel drawn to them, you're not just appreciating aesthetics, you're responding to something that was built partly for you, for anyone in the future who would be capable of recognizing what they represent. The ancient builders encoded multiple layers of meaning. The surface layer is physical, stones arranged in patterns that have survived. The second layer is mathematical and astronomical, ratios and alignments that demonstrate knowledge. The third layer is mythological, stories that preserve memory across generations. And perhaps there's a fourth layer, consciousness itself, patterns of awareness transmitted directly through something we don't yet understand, but can experience when we're in the right state. You're in that state now as sleep approaches. The analytical mind has quieted. The boundaries have softened. And in this liminal space between waking and sleeping, you're closer to the ancient world than you might be during full waking awareness. Not closer in time or space, but closer in consciousness, in the quality of awareness. So if insights come to you in dreams tonight, if you feel recognition or connection or understanding that doesn't come from logical thinking, don't dismiss it. Ancient people would have valued those experiences as authentic access to knowledge. They would have seen dreams as valid sources of information, maybe more valid than waking rational thought, because dreams bypass the filters and limitations that waking consciousness imposes. The question of whether we're the seventh civilization becomes less important in this light. What matters more is that we're connected to however many civilizations came before. We're the current expression of an ongoing human story. We carry forward what they transmitted, not just through genes or myths or monuments, but through consciousness itself. And part of what they transmitted is the capacity to wonder, to look at the world and see mystery rather than just material, to recognize that reality is stranger and deeper than it appears on surface examination. That capacity to wonder is itself a gift from the ancient world, a preserved treasure more valuable than any artifact. As sleep fully claims you now, as consciousness shifts into dreaming or deep rest, you're participating in the same cycle ancient people participated in. The daily rhythm of waking and sleeping mirrors the larger rhythm of civilizations rising and falling. Each night you die a small death into sleep. Each morning you're reborn into waking. And in that daily cycle, you enact the pattern that plays out across millennia. The ancient world died into catastrophe. We've been reborn from that death. Someday our civilization will die into whatever catastrophe or decline awaits. And from that death, new consciousness will emerge. We'll wonder about us the way we wonder about the ancients. We'll find fragments of what we built and ask the same questions we're asking. And they'll be right to ask those questions. They'll be right to wonder. They'll be right to remain open to possibilities that comfortable narratives exclude. Because the human story is not one of steady progress from primitive to advanced. It's a spiral, circling through similar themes at different scales, rising and falling but always continuing, always finding new expressions of the same fundamental questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? What came before us? What will come after? How do we fit into the vast pattern of time and change? These questions don't have final answers. They have endless iterations, each generation asking in their own way, each era responding according to their understanding, each cycle adding new layers to mysteries that never fully resolve. And that's not a flaw. That's a feature. The mystery keeps us engaged, keeps us curious, keeps us connected to something larger than ourselves. If all questions were answered, wonder would die. If all mysteries were solved, engagement would end. The ancient world gave us gift of enduring mystery, questions that survive their asking, puzzles that remain fascinating across millennia. So as you drift into complete sleep, carry gratitude for that gift. Gratitude for monuments that survive to make us wonder. Gratitude for myths that preserved fragments of memory. Gratitude for genetic markers that hint at deeper connections. Gratitude for the capacity to ask questions without needing immediate answers. You've spent this hour contemplating the possibility of lost civilizations, the question of whether we're the 7th or 1st or 20th, and whether the answer is ever definitively established or remains forever mysterious. The contemplation itself has value. It's connected you to deep time. It's reminded you that human story is longer than your own lifetime. It's opened you to possibilities that make existence more interesting. That's enough. That's more than enough. The ancient world asked nothing more than to be remembered, and you've remembered. They hoped someone would wonder about them, and you've wondered. They built to outlast catastrophe, and their buildings have outlasted. The cycle continues. Consciousness continues. The human story continues. And you're part of it, right now, in this moment, drifting in a sleep while connected to all who came before and all who will come after. Connected through time, through consciousness, through the shared human experience of being aware in a mysterious universe, of building and wondering and hoping that something of value will survive into whatever future awaits. Sleep now, peacefully and completely. The mysteries will be there tomorrow. The questions will wait. The ancient stones will stand silent, patient, knowing that some things don't need to be understood immediately to have profound value. Let that patience be yours. Let that mystery be comfort. Let that connection across time support you as you rest. The 7th civilization, or the 1st, or the 100th, it doesn't matter in this moment. What matters is that you're here, you're aware, you're part of the ongoing dance of consciousness and matter, of building and forgetting and remembering, of rising and falling and rising again. And in being part of that dance, you fulfill the ancient hope that awareness would continue, that questions would be asked again, that the deep human story would go on despite catastrophe and time. You are the answer the ancient world hoped for. Your curiosity is the victory they sought. Your wondering is the immortality they achieved. Rest in that. Sleep in that. Dream in that. And wake tomorrow to continue the story. One more day, one more consciousness, one more moment in the vast spiral of time where civilizations rise and fall, but awareness itself endures, asking questions, building meanings, creating beauty, passing forward whatever can be preserved. The ancient world is not dead. It lives in you, in your curiosity, in your capacity to wonder, in your willingness to consider possibilities beyond comfortable certainties. And that life, that continuation, that persistence of awareness across catastrophes and millennia, that is the real monument, more enduring than any stone, more preserved than any myth. You are the monument. Your consciousness is the preservation. And in sleeping now, in dreaming now, in resting now, you're not ending but continuing, not forgetting but remembering at levels deeper than words can reach, not separate from ancient world but connected to it through the fundamental mystery of being aware. Good night.